what is being denounced by Trump's domestic enemies as the most heretical foreign policy statement ever made by a sitting U.S. president, at least in our lifetime.
I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Well, Trump said that Zelensky started the war, and this has caused the biggest meltdown I've seen since Russiagate. What's your reaction?
Yeah, I'm not even sure if Trump meant to say that Zelensky started the war. He was just speaking off the cuff. But what he said repeatedly is that Zelensky could have avoided the war and ended it. And I think that's the important point. Everyone's freaking out and claiming that Trump claims that like Ukraine invaded Russia. That's not what he was saying. He was just saying that Zelensky should never have let this war start. And there's so many reasons why that is true. Zelensky had so many opportunities to avoid a Russian invasion. And Trump is walking away from what has been bipartisan policy for more than 10 years now, using Ukraine to provoke and ultimately bleed Russia. That's what the U.S.-backed coup in 2014 was all about. The subsequent encouragement to Ukraine to attack the Donbass, which was delivered by John Brennan, as I reported on. The subsequent sabotaging of the Minsk Accords, which could have ended that war that broke out. The refusal to negotiate with Russia before it invaded, and then the sabotage of the Istanbul peace talks after Russia invaded, and ignoring so many other overtures from Russia that we've heard about since. So Trump is basically right in saying that this all could have been avoided had Zelensky made different decisions. My only problem with his critique is he's putting too much on Zelensky. He's saying that, Zelensky played the U.S. No, the U.S. played Zelensky. They used him as a puppet, and they didn't back up his peace mandate that he was elected on. Now, I don't think Trump knows all those details. It doesn't really matter. The point is he's walking away from the policy, and that to me is the most important thing. His comments to me don't really carry that much significance. It's what he's doing with his actions, and what we're seeing so far is he's abandoning this proxy war project. And you can see that by the fact that he's even speaking to Russians. So Marco Rubio meeting with Sergei Lavrov, something that Antony Blinken refused to do for at least the first year into Russia's invasion. They wouldn't even talk. Talking about lifting sanctions, reestablishing contacts. Trump effectively already ruling out NATO for Ukraine, which was one of the major reasons why this war happened to begin with, because Biden refused to take it off the table, only to tell Ukraine at the very end, yes, sorry, I'm not giving you NATO. You're not ready for it. So Trump is just willing to say out loud what Biden refused to say before, because Biden wanted to use the prospect of Ukraine joining it to bait Russia into a war. And it seems like Trump is done with that now, finally. And I don't see how anybody can see that as a bad thing. This is the fact that the world's top 2 nuclear powers are even speaking. That's something worth welcoming. No matter what Trump's own rhetoric is around it or what his own personal motives are, it's a good thing that there's talks. And it's a good thing that those talks entail trying to end this horrific war.
Yeah, I'm glad Trump said that, though. I'm glad he said Zelensky started it. I mean, no one remembers Poroshenko, first of all. So Zelensky is Project Ukraine. He was brought to power by American advisors, including Nina Jankowicz. She actually was on his team. He's an American product. He's only there because of the U.S., and specifically because of the transatlantic faction in U.S. politics, which is now represented by the Democratic Party, because all of the sort of neocon Republicans have joined the Lincoln Project or have been put out to pasture by Trump. Zelensky's Ukraine has no sovereignty at all. That's why he wasn't invited, because what's the point of inviting the proxy when the U.S. was always determining whether Ukraine would negotiate or not? So Trump said Zelensky started it. Of course, Zelensky didn't literally start the war by invading in February 2022. The Russian special military operation began the full-scale war. But once you start interrogating Trump's comment and the fundamental truth that it's based on, Trump expresses things in very crude and often cretinous ways, but sometimes there's a fundamental truth behind it. Once you start interrogating that, the entire narrative of Ukraine is this brave, plucky democracy fighting on the front lines of freedom against a country that wants to reestablish the Soviet Union falls apart, because you have to actually examine the context that you laid out week after week, Aaron, or that Scott Horton has laid out over the course of 690 pages in his new authoritative and aptly titled book, Provoked. I mean, this book, if you want to just end an argument with a, Ukraine military aid supporter or a NATO troll, just refer to that book. And if you can't end the argument, it's big enough that you can just like bludgeon your opponent over the head with it repeatedly, and that'll end it. It's a massive doorstopper of a book. But the whole history there from 2014 on, and even before, explains why this war happened. War was inevitable. And, I've been warning about this since 2014. I'm one of those few Americans who saw this coming from my little corner of the internet. But you know who else said the war started in 2014? It's not John Mearsheimer. It's not Jeffrey Sachs or any of our friends that are on Judge Napolitano. It was Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO in 2013.
Didn't start in February last year. The war started in 2014. And since 2014, NATO allies have provided support to Ukraine with training, with equipment. So the Ukrainian armed forces were much stronger in 2022 than they were in 2014. And of course, that made a huge difference when President Putin decided to attack Ukraine.
Obviously, Stoltenberg is speaking from an alternate, opposite angle to Trump. But there he is. He's saying the war started in 2014. The war started with the Maidan coup, and which led to the annexation of Crimea, because which country is going to allow a hostile foreign power in Washington to control the government and hand select it, as Victoria Nuland in the Obama administration was doing in Ukraine, and then deprive a whole part of the population in the East, the Russophone population, of their national rights? They're not going to allow it to happen. Crimea was annexed, and that really was the beginning of the war. And then Ukraine was aggressively NATOized, which made the full-scale war inevitable. So Trump kind of landed on a very forbidden truth, which I think is the essential truth that Americans need to understand to know why this war needs to be ended, and that the U.S. has all the power to do it.
Jens Stoltenberg also said that Putin went to war to prevent more NATO on his border.
President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021, and he actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign, to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us. And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. The opposite happened. He wanted us to sign a promise never to enlarge NATO. He wanted us to remove our military infrastructure in all allies that have joined NATO since 1997, meaning half of NATO, all the Central and Eastern Europe. We should remove NATO from that of our alliance, introducing some kind of E and B or second-class membership. We rejected that. So he went to war to prevent more NATO close to his borders.
He went to war to prevent more NATO across his borders. That's from Jens Stoltenberg, not from Vladimir Putin. And Donald Trump is basically saying the same thing now, and abandoning that policy of trying to expand NATO into Ukraine. That he's now being pilloried for just saying out loud what everyone has been denying for so long, even though people like Jens Stoltenberg admitted it, that's what this war is about. And the freak out, I got to say, it's pretty wonderful to see, because these are people who have pushed, not just a policy that has threatened the world, because we're talking about tensions between the world's top nuclear powers, but has destroyed Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. And of course, it's not, Ukrainian society across the board that feels the impact. It's lower class Ukrainians who are dying on the battlefield, who are being pulled into these vans by Ukrainian military kidnappers, basically, to go fight off and die. People who can afford it can afford to flee the country or bribe their way out of being enlisted. So for the sake of Western proxy warriors, young Ukrainians from the lower classes have been dying. And if Donald Trump puts an end to that, that's a wonderful thing. And that's why all the people who've profited off this and pushed us for so long are freaking out right now, because their project is coming to an end. And we're seeing, as you said, we're seeing who really runs the show. As soon as the U.S. turns off the spigot, everyone recognizes that it's over. A year ago, Emmanuel Macron of France was like, toying with the idea of like sending French troops to Ukraine, right? Remember that? He was being a tough guy. Well, what's happening now that Trump is basically pulling out the U.S.? Macron just said that, yeah, no, we're not sending troops. Of course not. It was all a tough guy act, with Ukrainians with Ukrainians being the only ones, along with European consumers, but mainly Ukrainians with their lives literally being told to bear the sacrifice.